Harlem Renaissance or the new Negro movement. These men and women were creating completely on their own terms. They were change agents. They were unashamed. And the work that they were producing at a very, very high level of accomplishment. I think that the lessons, if there are lessons for us, we can also strive to do the best we can to create from the highest level that we can, and for us to be unashamed of who we are and make our best efforts to likewise create our work on its own terms. Don't be afraid. We do not need to be ashamed, and we can be completely comfortable with who we are as Black people, as people of color, creating and sharing our work with the world on its own terms, just as they did. The poem I'm presenting is called Like a Strong Tree by Claude McKay, one of the central practitioners of the Harlem Renaissance, AKA the new Negro movement. Like a strong tree that in the virgin earth sends far its roots through rock and loam and clay, and proudly thrives in rain or time of dearth. When dry waves scare the rain, come sprites away, like a strong tree that reaches down deep, deep for something water, fluid underground, where the great ringed, unsightly blind worms creep and queer things of the netherworld abound. So would I live in imperial growth, touching the surface and the depth of things, instinctively responsive unto both, tasting the sweets of being, fearing no stings, sensing the subtle smell of changing forms, like a strong tree against 1,000 storms.
Welcome to another episode of Behind the Curtain with the Classical Theater of Harlem. Today we're going to continue our discussion of the Harlem Renaissance, and I am beyond thrilled to be joined by master actor, Mr. Delroy Lindo. For a lot of you will remember Delroy's performances in 4 Spike Lee's movies, most notably recently The Five Bloods. Others will remember from Harold Loomis and Othello from the stage. And some of our younger viewers might know him from his role on The Simpsons. I'm delighted to be joined by Mr. Delroy Lindo. How you doing?
I'm well. How you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for joining us today. I'm just going to kick it off. The Harlem Renaissance.
Yes.
When I think of it, it's easy to romanticize what these folks who have come before us have done. But you said something that I just want to flesh out. These people were change agents.
Right.
And doing the work. And I'm just curious to know, when you think about it, removing the romantic filter, how you saw the arts in a tremendously difficult time, much like our time now.
Before I answer your question, you just raised something that you spoke about, perhaps our tendency to romanticize. And I was looking last night. Actually, hold on one second. I don't have it with me, but I was looking last night at a book on the Harlem Renaissance, and there was a chart in the book that illustrated the various, for want of a better term, benefactors that people like Langston Hughes, Claude McKay, Zora Neale Hurston, the benefactors that they all had. I really meant to bring the book down here, and here it is. This book right here. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
While we're talking, I'll see if I can find the chart. But here's my point. As I was looking at the chart that illustrated the various benefactors, and when I say benefactors, I'm assuming that these are people like Carl Van Vechten, who I guess bankrolled many of these artists, made it possible for them to continue producing their work, quote unquote, independently.
Mm-hmm.
Independently. Um, but I wondered what the cost of that was. As I was looking at the chart, I wondered what the cost of that was for them in terms of um, their output. We can look at the work and we see that the work was extremely unapologetic. We look at the work and we see that they were indeed change agents in as much as they were, I believe, working on their own terms. Working, I think, from a point of view of being people of African descent. Therefore, they were unabashedly, unashamedly, the alternate term is the new Negro movement. And I think they were committed to that ethos. But I just wondered, and I'll find this chart before we wrap, I just wondered if there were any areas of compromise for them. One can't necessarily see that looking at the work, because the work speaks for itself. But just in terms of the interpersonal relationships and connections, I found myself wondering, as James Baldwin says, there's always a price on the ticket. Freedom ain't free. There's a price on the ticket. I wondered what the price of those relationships were and how these extraordinary artists navigated those dynamics. Having said all of that, I will say that, yes, as I think about the Harlem Renaissance, and the term that came to mind for me was these were change agents. And in as much as it seemed to me that they were taking responsibility for their output, for their creative output, and presenting that no holds barred. Does that make sense?
Without a doubt. You mentioned the organic nature of the work and being unapologetic. And for me, being a man of a certain age, I go back to that romanticized version, because when I look back at the work, you're absolutely right. The work speaks for itself. It's eloquent, it's succinct, it captures more in a sentence or a strain of music than a lot of other things that I have been in contact with. So that authenticity rings true to me. And I'm going to share a personal story. When I was a little boy, about 8 years old, in the kitchen with my mother, she recited the Langston Hughes Mother to Son poem to me.
Oh, wow.
And I bring that up to say that was my introduction into this majestical world.
That's extraordinary. That may be something, a small memory for you, but listening, hearing it, that a parent, I never had anything like that in my own life, but the fact that your mom, that a parent would take the time to introduce you, to read to you something that significant, is amazing, frankly.
I'm profoundly grateful. That sort of support propelled the trajectory of my career to even go into theater. But I bring that up as a flashpoint for me, that was my introduction into this world, because for a variety of reasons, through our educational system, we were excluded from knowing about this rich, robust world.
No question.
And so when I found it, it gave me permission. And to find out that everything, when I got later into Zora Neale Hurston and found that she was writing in a very specific dialect, that resonated true to me because I knew these people. And so I say all of that to say, is there a moment that you remember when your passion for this time period, the light turned on to explore in those dark corners?
Not specifically in terms of that time period, but there are there are two instances that I can recall, and forgive me, I'm trying to find this chart, right? Here it is. Tell me if you can see that chart.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So as I looked at this chart last night, I just, on the one hand, thank God that they had these benefactors, right?
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, I don't know, for want of a better term, I don't want to say the cynic in me, but I found myself contemplating, I just wonder what the cost of those relationships were. I'd heard, for instance, that at a certain point, Zora Neale Hurston had a falling out with Carl Van Vechten. I heard about that, right, in my travels. And I wondered what that was about, right? So, not to belabor the point, but when you brought up our tendency to romanticize history sometimes, I found myself wondering, wow, I wish I could be a fly on the wall, go back and talk to Claude McKay, Langston, Alain Locke, all these cats, and get a real-time assessment of what those relationships were. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Because I think you make a very, very good point in terms of perhaps a tendency to romanticize, even though, as we agree, the work spoke for itself. Mm-hmm. But let me answer your question. When I was 5 or 6 years old, I appeared in the nativity play at my elementary school. I played one of the kings. And frequently, speaking with various people, I have said that was the spark. That was when the fuse was lit. That ended up that developed into, when I grow up, I want to be an actor. In speaking with the press recently in support of Five Bloods and people asking me about that, I came to a slightly different understanding of what that experience was for me, because it was not an ego-driven phenomenon. Well, no. Yes, it was an ego-driven phenomenon in the following regard. It affirmed me. The experience affirmed me, because I remember that my elementary school teacher, whose name I cannot remember, but she spoke about my presentation. One of the other kids in the play was having a hard time remembering his lines, and I remember the teacher said this kid's name was Michael Penny. I'll never forget it, Michael Penny, and Michael Penny was playing King Herod. And Michael Penny could not remember his At a certain point, the teacher said, look at the way Delroy does what he's doing. And it was not, and again, I'm remembering this retrospectively, obviously, but it was not, oh, look, I'm so special. I really think it was the affirmation for who I was. Mm. And that's a very specific distinction that I make as compared to, ooh, I'm special and I'm good. I think it was the affirmation for who I was. Mm. That sparked me. I would say that is my earliest recollection of being affirmed, creatively, even though at 5, 6 years old, I was not assessing it in those terms, but retrospectively, I believe that's when the spark was lit. And I believe that's what that spark represented to me. I went to all-white schools in England. This was literally an all-white elementary school. I was literally the only Black student, literally. And so and there were various, issues around that reality, but being in the play and being affirmed in that manner, I believe that was my first creative affirmation that grew into this desire the desire that I had to become an actor when I grew up.
It's profound how much that story resonates with me personally. And to have an adult, a teacher, or maybe your parents or someone affirm something in you, even at an early age, can have a tremendous ripple effect on the trajectory of one's life. Because
absolutely.
I was absolutely in a similar situation, all white school, found my way through, I was a comic book learner, and I love the dramaturgy behind comic books.
Where are you from? Where are you from?
Miami, Florida.
Got you.
So I grew up in Miami, Florida, but I found, and to use your word, affirmation from others to say, "Wow, you're a really good speaker," and that's a loaded thing, but to have that confidence to say, "Oh, I can do this." So I say all that to say there is power in the word.
No question.
We can water plants, or we can, destroy with those words. Not to get too far off, I would just want to say, one of the things that fascinates me, and I'd love to take your temperature on this, was this salon culture of community that was happening during the Harlem Renaissance that, at least in my understanding, propelled the other artists and pushed them to be better, this salon type of community. Let me just say, it's easy for me also to romanticize the era when you were coming of age as an actor, to look around and see your contemporaries, Denzel and Sam, and working with the Negro Ensemble Company. I wonder what you would say to the artist who is trying to create now in this unprecedented time of aloneness,
yes.
How to continue to push the art forward, even being siloed in isolation?
Oh man, that's such a great question, and I'm finding I'm trying to choose my words very carefully, because that is a question that I could answer. I have things to say in response to that. I don't have an issue responding. I'm trying to really connect with what I feel about that and give you that answer. And I think in this time of isolation, I'm an only child. I have a 19-year-old son whom I believe you met a few summers ago. He's now 19 and about to go to college on a basketball scholarship. Yes, I'm bragging. A full ride basketball scholarship. Yes, I'm bragging. I'm an only child. My son is an only child. And there's a certain isolation inherent in that reality. I think my son deals with it quite differently than the way that I dealt with it. The way that I dealt with it, and this speaks to your question, it compelled me to start using my imagination to entertain myself. My son takes after his mom, my wife, whom you also met. They are both very social animals. Therefore, my son has a core group of friends that he spends time with. And on some level, I think that is partially his way of addressing the phenomenon of being an only child. For me, it sparked my imagination, and I would utilize frankly, out of my loneliness, it compelled me to examine my inner self. And that sounds very highfalutin, right? But I had this alter ego. I'm not going to tell you his name, but I had an alter ego. And this alter ego would address and engage various circumstances that I created. So, to your question, trust who you are. Trust who you are. And for anybody who is on any kind of an artistic, creative trajectory, trust what you have to say. We all know that the entertainment industry is a culture that very oftentimes rejects what we have to offer. In this time of isolation, to address specifically a component of what you asked me, we have the time to ask ourselves, who are we and what are we about? And again, that is a very lofty, but there's value in that in terms of answering that for ourselves and then creating from that point of view. Who are we? What do we have to say to the world? What do we want to say to the world? Which is what the Harlem Renaissance creators were doing. Here and now, we have an opportunity, as painful as it may be, as painful as the isolation may be, as frustrating as it may be, and it is, and I'm clear about that. And I also understand that many of us don't have the luxury of sitting in a room and staring at our navel. We don't have the luxury of sitting in a room and just contemplating life and contemplating who we are. However, again, to your question, during this time, perhaps we have a unique opportunity to make lemonade out of the lemons that we have been given. And in making that lemonade, the value of who we are and the value of investigating who we are and trusting who we are and believing in who we are, each individual, and therefore what we have to offer the world, can be a path of salvation, redemption, for all of us. One thing I would say about that, and this also connects to the Harlem Renaissance, I believe, one must make one's best effort to define for oneself, if it is possible, what do I want to say to the world? What is my place in the world? Excuse me, I just spat all over my computer screen. What is my place in the world, and how do I want to give expression to what I believe my place is? And that's unique to creative people in the sense that, or put another way, I think that creative people can have a unique way of giving expression, birthing that, because we are creative. And if you can answer that question for yourself, given the fact that the answer will change, it may not be the same this year as it is next year. It may not be the same this week as it is next week, or today as it is tomorrow. But if you're asking yourself those questions, who am I? What do I represent? What do I want to say to the world that speaks to who I am? Then perhaps during this time of isolation will increase our efficacy, our ability to express, and particularly to express from those places of, as you say, isolation. And if we can modify that reality and move from isolation to individualism. Who am I as the individual? And perhaps expressing from one's individuality is perhaps less stark, perhaps, than expressing from a place of isolation. I hope all of that made sense.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. I don't know where I can take it from there. I appreciate your time and thank you for those pearls of wisdom. And just as a personal note, you know, this really means a lot because of your work and your standing as a master actor and director. You know, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but I had a moment where I had that generational divide and saying, you know, people are leaving us and they're joining the ancestors. Who are the next people? And then you find out that you're moving rapidly up the queue. And so then one day you look up and you are that person to the people behind you. So, you know, on behalf of the young people out there that I hope this reaches, thank you for sharing this. And thank you for giving us an insight into how you feel about the Harlem Renaissance and to your inner life as a man. So, Delroy Lindo, I so appreciate it. Much love to you and your family. And thank you for taking time to do this.
I'm going to say one thing in closing, because you mentioned Denzel, you mentioned Sam. Denzel and I happened to go to the same acting school for 1 year. He left the American Conservatory Theater. But we were all in New York, you know, the late 70s, early 80s when careers were starting. If ever you get a chance, if ever you get an opportunity to speak with them, ask them this same question. But what I can tell you for myself and the friends of mine who are actors who I'm closer with, there was a belief that theater could change the world. And it came out of the, you know, Black arts movement of the 60s and the 70s. And I was on the tail end of that, you know, in New York in 1979, 1980, 81, 82. But there was still that belief that theater could change the world. Do I still believe that? No, not exactly. But what I do believe is that theater, any expression of good art, any positive, strong, creative expression can impact how people feel and think in their own lives. And I know that because of some of the work that I have done in my career and how that work has impacted people. So I say that in closing, because that idea, that ethos, that theater could change the world was one of the building blocks of a belief system for myself and some of my colleagues as we were starting our careers. And so the men and women of the Harlem Renaissance had a belief system that they were creating out of. So perhaps during this time, as an extension of who am I, what am I about, you know, what do I believe in? What do I believe in? And how do I want to make what I believe in a part of what I'm sharing with the world, what I'm expressing creatively with the world and with my colleagues, with my fellow human beings? So I'll leave it there. One small thing, and I do have to get on. okay, if theater can't quite change the world per se, we all want to, I believe, as creative people, be involved with work that speaks to, illuminates on some level the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
And if we have that gift, and it is a gift, particularly in an environment, in the environment of the entertainment industry, which not infrequently is about the business of making money. If those of us in the entertainment world can be involved with work that illuminates the human condition in large or small ways, then that gives us an ethos, a philosophy that we can work from and use as a building block for who we are as creative people, and have that be part of our belief system, our ethos. That's it.
Hey, amen to that. Godspeed, continued health, love to the family. And once
God
again,
bless you.
thank you so much for taking time to do this. I really appreciate it, and so will our viewers.
God bless, man. All the very
Darryl.
best to you.
Thank you.
Peace.